I spent 2 years praying for a miracle. When those two pink lines finally appeared, I thought my life was beginning. But the moment I announced my pregnancy in a room full of our family, my husband didn't kiss me, he slapped me across the face so hard I hit the floor. I looked at the 5 plastic sticks lined up on the edge of the bathroom counter, my vision blurred by a constant stream of tears that I couldn't seem to stop. 2 pink lines. On every single one of them. For 2 years, I had lived in a cycle of hope and heartbreak, staring at the stark, lonely single line of a negative test month after month. I had spent thousands of dollars on specialists, herbal supplements, and ovulation trackers. I had cried myself to sleep more times than I could count, convinced that my body was broken, that I was failing as a woman and a wife. Every time a friend announced a pregnancy on social media, it felt like a physical blow to my chest. I had started avoiding baby showers and walking the long way around the grocery store just so I wouldn't have to pass the diaper aisle. And now, here it was. The miracle I had prayed for was finally real. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the bathtub, and sobbed into my hands. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was my sister, Carrie. I swiped the screen with a trembling finger, my voice coming out as a jagged mess of air and salt. When I told her, she didn't just congratulate me, she took charge. She told me this couldn't be a quiet conversation over a Tuesday night dinner. She said after 2 years of darkness, I deserved a spotlight. She convinced me to throw a massive reveal party, to invite everyone who had supported us through the struggle, and to turn this into the greatest memory of our lives. I wanted to tell Evan the second he walked through the door, but Carrie was right. I wanted to see his face in front of everyone. I wanted to see the man who had held me while I cried over every negative test finally get the reward he deserved. The 7 weeks of planning that followed were the hardest secret I ever had to keep. I had to hide the morning sickness, the exhaustion, and the sheer, glowing electricity that felt like it was humming under my skin every time Evan kissed me. Every time he mentioned how much he looked forward to us having a family one day, I had to bite my tongue until it bled to keep from screaming the truth. I wore baggy sweaters even when the weather was warm, blaming it on a chill I couldn't shake. I pretended to drink wine at dinner by switching my glass with grape juice when he wasn't looking. Finally, the night of the party arrived. Our house was packed, the air thick with the scent of expensive appetizers and the nervous, happy energy of 40 people who knew a secret was coming but didn't know what it was. My parents stood by the appetizer table, my mom already looking at me with that intuitive, motherly suspicion that made me want to giggle. Carrie was a whirlwind of silk and excitement, constantly shooting me, "This is it," glances from across the room. Evan's parents had flown in from Arizona, looking regal and expectant, and his younger brother, Jeff, had been a godsend. He'd arrived 3 hours early to help me move furniture, arrange the floral centerpieces, and set up the massive gift table in the corner of the dining room. I watched Evan moving through the crowd, the quintessential host. He was shaking hands, laughing at his boss's jokes, and leaning down to whisper things in people's ears that made them beam. He looked so handsome in his charcoal suit, the lighting from the chandelier catching the silver in his watch. I stood in the kitchen doorway, my hand resting instinctively on the still flat surface of my stomach, and I felt a surge of love so powerful it made me dizzy. I was about to give him the one thing he wanted more than anything in the world. I was about to make him a father. I grabbed a silver fork and tapped it against my crystal wine glass. The sound was sharp, cutting through the low hum of conversation like a bell. Slowly, the room went quiet. 40 faces turned toward me, a sea of expectant eyes and polite smiles. Evan made his way through the crowd, his arms sliding around my waist, pulling me close to his side. His touch was warm, familiar, and steady. He looked down at me with those dark, curious eyes, a playful smile playing on his lips as if he were waiting for a joke. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice wavering with a mix of adrenaline and pure joy. "I know some of you traveled a long way to be in this room tonight, and I promise you, I'm about to make it worth the trip." I looked up at Evan, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to savor this second forever, the moment right before everything changed. Evan, I've spent 2 years telling you how much I love you and how much I wanted to start a life with you. Well, tonight, we're finally starting. I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. The room didn't just erupt, it exploded. My mother let out a high-pitched scream of pure joy that echoed off the ceiling. My father started clapping with a ferocity that made his face turn red. Carrie was jumping up and down, tears streaming down her face, screaming that she knew it all along. Everyone was moving toward us, arms outstretched for hugs, voices overlapping in a chaotic, beautiful symphony of congratulations. The energy in that room was pure, unadulterated love. But as I turned to Evan, expecting to be swept off my feet, expecting the kiss of a lifetime, the world went cold. Evan's arm hadn't tightened around me. It had dropped. He was standing perfectly still, his body as rigid as a statue. His face hadn't just gone pale, it had turned a sickly, ghostly white. His eyes weren't full of joy, they were wide with a terrifying, blank shock. Evan? I whispered, my smile faltering. I reached out a hand to touch his chest, my voice barely audible over the noise of the cheering crowd. Baby, aren't you happy? We're finally going to be parents. The blow came so fast I didn't even see his hand move. The sound of his palm hitting my cheek was like a gunshot in the silent room. The force of it snapped my head to the side and sent me crashing backward. I hit the gift table, the glass vases and wrapped boxes tumbling down around me as I slumped to the floor. The pain was immediate, a blinding white flash that seemed to vibrate in my teeth and radiate down my neck. It felt like my face had been pressed against a hot iron. For 3 seconds, the upbeat party music kept playing, a cruel contrast to the horror that had just unfolded. Then, someone killed the sound. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. I stayed on the floor, my hand over my burning cheek, looking up at the man I had lived with for 6 years. I didn't recognize him. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unbridled hatred. His chest was heaving, his breath coming in ragged, ugly gasps, and his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. You cheating whore, he roared. The sound of his voice was a physical assault, louder and more violent than the slap had been. You really thought you could stand there in front of my family and pass off someone else's mistake as mine? I couldn't speak. My brain was a jumble of static and pain. I looked at the broken glass on the floor, then back at him. Evan, what are you talking about? I finally managed to gasp out, my voice trembling. I've never cheated on you. I would never do that to you. You're the only man I've ever been with. He let out a laugh that sounded like a serrated blade. Stop lying. Stop the act. He was screaming now, his voice cracking with the intensity of his rage. The veins in his neck were bulging, and spit flew from his mouth as he paced the small space in front of me like a caged animal. You can't be pregnant with my baby, Marina. It's impossible. I had a vasectomy 4 years ago, before we even walked down the aisle. I can't have children. I made sure of it. The words hit me harder than his hand had. A vasectomy. 4 years ago. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. For 2 years, he had watched me cry. He had sat in doctors' offices with me while I underwent invasive tests to see why I wasn't conceiving. He had watched me take those negative tests and fall apart, and he had held me and told me it wasn't my fault, all while knowing that it was physically impossible for him to give me a child. He had let me believe my body was the problem. He had let me live in a state of constant, quiet failure while he hid a secret that changed the entire foundation of our marriage. So, whose is it? He continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He stepped closer, looming over me on the floor. Who have you been sleeping with behind my back? How long has this been going on? Was it while I was at work? Was it in our bed? He turned toward the room, his arms spread wide as if he were inviting the 40 people watching in horrified silence to join in his interrogation. Look at her. Look at the perfect wife standing there pretending to be confused. She knows exactly what she did. She knows exactly whose brat she's carrying. The room remained dead quiet. My mother was slumped in a chair, her hand over her mouth, tears flowing freely down her face. My father looked like a man who had been turned to stone, his eyes fixed on Evan with a look of pure, murderous intent, but his body was paralyzed by the shock of it. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the house. And then, a shadow fell over me. Someone was kneeling beside me, their hands warm and steady on my shoulders. I looked up and saw Jeff. His face was as pale as Evan's had been, but his eyes were filled with a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite identify. He brushed a shard of glass away from my dress and helped me sit up, his body positioning itself between me and his brother like a human shield. "What is wrong with you, Evan?" Jeff's voice was shaking, but it was filled with a cold, hard anger that seemed to slice through his brother's hysteria. "You just hit your pregnant wife. You just humiliated her in front of every person who matters to her. Look at yourself. You look like a monster." Evan didn't hear him. He was still pacing, his hands tugging at his hair as if he were trying to pull the thoughts right out of his head. 2 years. 2 years I let you make me feel like I was the one holding you back from your dream. And all this time, you were spreading your legs for the first guy who looked at you. You're a liar. You're a fake. He turned back to me, his eyes burning with a light that looked like madness. "I want the truth, Marina. I want it right now. Who did this?" I stood up, leaning heavily on Jeff for support. My cheek was already starting to swell, the skin tight and throbbing. I looked at Evan, really looked at him, and the love I had felt 10 minutes ago was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. I didn't have an answer for how I was pregnant. I didn't have a logical explanation for how a man with a vasectomy could father a child. But I knew one thing with absolute, bone-deep certainty. I hadn't cheated. I hadn't been with anyone else in 6 years. My body was telling a truth that his secret was trying to erase. "We're doing a paternity test," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. It was low and cold, cutting through his screaming. "We're going to find out the truth, Evan. And when that test comes back showing that you are the father, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember the sound of your hand hitting my face. I want you to remember the names you called me. Because when the science proves I was faithful, you're going to have to live with the monster you became tonight. And I will never, ever forgive you." Evan laughed again, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, just for a second. Doubt? Fear? It didn't matter. He snatched his keys off the counter and headed for the door. "Fine. Tomorrow morning. But don't expect me to be there when you find out your miracle is just another lie." He slammed the front door so hard the house groaned. One by one, the guests began to file out. No one said goodbye. No one looked me in the eye. They just grabbed their coats and vanished into the night, leaving me standing in the middle of a room filled with broken glass and the ruins of my life. I was pregnant, I was alone, and I was being branded a cheater by the man who had been lying to me for 4 years. The battle had just begun. I spent the first night of the rest of my life sitting on the floor of the nursery we hadn't even built yet. The room was empty, just a blank canvas of beige walls and a single window that looked out over the quiet street, but to me, it felt like a prison cell. I sat there in the dark, my hand pressed against my throbbing cheek, listening to the silence of a house that used to be full of laughter. Evan was in the guest room. I could hear him moving around occasionally, the creak of a floorboard, the heavy thud of a suitcase being thrown onto the bed. Each sound was a reminder that the man I had loved for 6 years now looked at me with the same disgust you'd have for something you found rotting under your porch. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the sting of his palm against my skin. I heard the word whore echoing through the rafters. I thought about the baby, the tiny, innocent life that was supposed to be our bridge to the future, and I felt a wave of terror so cold it made my teeth chatter. I knew I hadn't cheated. I knew it with every fiber of my being. But Evan had a vasectomy. Science was standing on his side, and all I had was my word, which was currently worth less than the broken glass still scattered in the dining room. Morning came with a gray, sickly light. I hadn't showered. I hadn't even washed the dried tears off my face. I just stood up, my joints stiff and aching, and walked to the kitchen. Evan was already there. He was wearing his work suit, looking sharp and professional, as if he hadn't just dismantled our lives 12 hours ago. He was drinking coffee, staring out the window, his jaw set in that hard, angry line. When I walked in, he didn't even turn his head. He just set the mug down with a sharp clack and picked up his car keys. "We're going to the clinic now," he said. His voice was like a frozen lake, flat, cold, and ready to crack under the slightest pressure. "I've already called them. They can fit us in for an emergency draw. Don't speak to me in the car. Don't try to explain anything. Just get your shoes on." The drive to the clinic was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The air in the car was heavy, suffocatingly thick with the things we weren't saying. I looked at Evan's profile, the sharp nose, the strong jaw, the eyes I used to find so much comfort in. He looked like a stranger. He looked like a man who had already decided I was guilty and was just waiting for the judge to read the sentence. I wanted to reach out and touch his arm, to beg him to remember who I was, but I remembered the way he had looked at me on the floor of our dining room. I stayed in my corner of the car, my hands folded tightly in my lap, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years to let there be a mistake. To let the vasectomy have failed. To let the world make sense again. The clinic was a place of cold linoleum and the smell of antiseptic. We sat in the waiting room, 4 chairs apart, like two people waiting for a bus they both hated. The silence between us was a physical thing, a wall that felt miles thick. Every time the door opened, I flinched. Every time a nurse walked by, I felt like they were looking at me, knowing I was the woman whose husband had called her a cheater in front of 40 people. When the nurse finally called my name, I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of water. Evan didn't look up. He just stayed in his chair, staring at a magazine he wasn't reading. "It will be 7 to 10 business days for the results," the nurse said after she had drawn the blood. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile, probably noticing the swelling on my cheek. "We'll call you the moment they're processed." 7 to 10 days. A week of hell. I walked back to the waiting room and nodded to Evan. He stood up immediately and walked out the door without waiting for me. I followed him, feeling like a dog that had been kicked but still didn't know how to do anything but trail behind its master. The social death started on the second day. I had turned my phone off the night of the party, but when I finally gathered the courage to turn it back on, it felt like it was going to explode in my hand. It wasn't just messages, it was a digital execution. The first one was from Evan's mother. "I always knew you were trash, Marina. Liam deserves better than a woman who tries to pin another man's bastard on him. Don't ever call this house again." Then came his sister. "You disgust me. I hope the truth destroys you as much as you destroyed my brother." His aunt, his cousins, even people I thought were my friends, they all had something to say. The word cheater was used so many times it lost its meaning. It just became a sound, a sharp, buzzing noise that wouldn't stop. I sat on the edge of the bed and read every single one of them. I felt the shame sinking into my skin, heavy and hot. Even if I was proven innocent, how could I ever look these people in the eye again? How could I go to Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas morning knowing that their first instinct was to believe I was a monster? My own family was a different kind of pain. Carrie was the only one who didn't sound like she was mourning a dead person. She came over that afternoon and found me huddled under the covers in the dark. She didn't ask questions. She just climbed into bed beside me and held me while I sobbed into her shoulder. "You have to leave him, Marina," she whispered. "The test doesn't matter anymore. He hit you. He shamed you. A man who loves you doesn't do that, even if he thinks you lied. He protected himself and destroyed you. You can't go back from that." "I just need the results," I choked out. I just need him to know he was wrong. I need the world to see I'm not what they say I am. And then what? Carrie asked. He says sorry and you go back to making him dinner. You can't unring this bell, sis. The house is already on fire. My parents were different. My father called and his voice was thick with a rage that terrified me. I'm coming over there, Marina. I'm going to settle this. I had to beg him to stay away. I had to tell him that if he came over and fought Evan, it would only make me look more guilty, like I was hiding behind my daddy because I couldn't face the truth. My mother just cried on the phone. How could this happen, Marina? We raised you better. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure there isn't someone else? That hurt the most. That was the knife in the heart. My own mother, the woman who had watched me grow up, who knew my heart, was asking me if I was sure I hadn't forgotten about an affair. I hung up the phone and screamed into my pillow until my throat felt like it was bleeding. By day 4, the isolation was complete. Evan was a ghost. He left before I woke up and came home after I was supposed to be asleep. He wouldn't eat anything I cooked. He wouldn't even use the same bathroom. I was a leper in my own home. I stopped showering. I stopped eating. I just wandered the house, touching the things we had bought together, the photos from our wedding, the little souvenirs from our trips. Everything looked like a lie. Every memory was tainted. I felt the baby moving, or maybe it was just my stomach twisting in knots, and I felt a surge of resentment. This child, the thing I had wanted more than life itself, was currently the reason my world was ending. That was the afternoon Jeff showed up. I heard a knock at the door, and my first instinct was to hide. I thought it was another one of Evan's relatives coming to spit on me. But when I looked through the peephole, it was Jeff. He was holding a bag of takeout and a small bouquet of wildflowers. When I opened the door, he didn't look at me with disgust. He looked at me with a deep, aching pity that made me want to collapse. I figured you weren't eating, he said. His voice was soft, the only kind thing I'd heard in days. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and he walked into the kitchen. He didn't seem to notice the mess or the fact that I smelled like sweat and grief. He unpacked the food, my favorite Chinese place, and set out the containers. He handed me a fork and sat down across from me. Evan is being an idiot, Jeff said. He didn't look at me as he spoke, he just focused on opening the rice. The way he treated you at the party, it was inexcusable. My family is acting like a pack of wolves, and I'm ashamed of them. I've been trying to talk sense into him, but he's in a dark place, Marina. He had a vasectomy, Jeff, I said, my voice cracking. He thinks it's impossible. And I don't know how to explain it. I just know I haven't been with anyone else. I've never even thought about it. Jeff reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His skin was warm, and for a second, the ice in my chest started to melt. I believe you, he said. I've known you for 6 years, Marina. You're the most loyal person I've ever met. Science is a funny thing. Tests fail. Procedures don't always work the way they're supposed to. But people don't just change their entire character overnight. You're not a cheater. I know that. I started to cry again, but this time it wasn't the jagged, desperate sobbing of the last few days. It was a release. Someone believed me. Someone in that family didn't think I was trash. Jeff stayed for 3 hours. He didn't ask me to defend myself. He didn't tell me what I should do. He just talked about normal things, his job, a movie he'd seen, the weather. He made me feel like a human being again. When he left, he hugged me at the door, a long, firm hug that made me feel safe for the first time since the slap. Call me if you need anything, he whispered. Day or night. I'm on your side, Marina. Always. I watched him drive away, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the test would prove it. Maybe the doctor would explain that the vasectomy had reversed itself. It happened, didn't it? I'd read about it online. Recanalization. It was rare, but it was possible. I clung to that word like a life raft. I repeated it over and over in my head as I fell into a fitful sleep that night. Recanalization. Recanalization. Day 6 was the worst. The physical toll of the stress was starting to show. My face was still bruised, a sickly yellow-green color that I couldn't hide with makeup. I was dizzy every time I stood up. The baby, my baby, felt like a heavy stone in my gut. I spent the afternoon looking at the nursery again. I imagined what it would look like with a crib and a rocking chair. I imagined a little boy who looked like Evan. I imagined us standing there together, laughing about the big misunderstanding. I was delusional, I knew it, but it was the only thing keeping me from walking into the ocean. Day 7. The mail truck pulled up at 2 p.m. I was standing at the window, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I saw the mailman slide a white envelope into the box. I didn't even wait for him to drive away. I ran out the front door in my bare feet, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I grabbed the mail and sorted through it with trembling fingers. Bills, junk mail, a postcard, and then, the white envelope. The clinic's logo was in the top left corner. My name was typed on the front in cold, black letters. I held it against my chest, my eyes closed. This was it. The end of the nightmare. I walked back into the house and sat at the kitchen table. I called Jeff first. I don't know why I didn't call Evan. Maybe it was because I knew Evan wouldn't answer. Or maybe it was because Jeff was the only one who deserved to hear the truth. It's here, I told him when he picked up. The results are here. I'm coming over, he said. Don't open it yet. Wait for me. I waited. I sat there with the envelope in front of me, staring at it like it was a holy relic. 10 minutes later, Jeff's car pulled into the driveway. He ran into the house, looking out of breath. He didn't say anything, he just sat down next to me and took my hand. You ready? He asked. I nodded. I picked up the letter opener, a silver one we'd received as a wedding gift, and slid it under the flap. The sound of the paper tearing felt like a thunderclap in the quiet room. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. My eyes skipped over the legal jargon and the medical codes, searching for the only words that mattered. My vision was swimming, the letters dancing on the page. Probability of paternity, 0%. Result, Liam Vance is excluded as the biological father of the fetus. The world didn't just stop, it inverted. I read the words again. Then again. I felt the air leave my lungs in a long, slow hiss. This was a mistake. This had to be a mistake. I looked at Jeff, my mouth hanging open, the paper shaking so hard in my hand it sounded like a dying bird's wings. What does it say, Marina? Jeff asked. His voice was low, urgent. It says he's not the father, I whispered. The back door slammed open. Evan walked in, his face flushed, his eyes searching mine. He must have seen Jeff's car. He must have known. He saw the paper in my hand and he didn't even ask. He just snatched it away. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched the moment he hit the 0%. I watched his face transform from shock into a pure, crystalline triumph that was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. There it is, he said. His voice was a growl, a sound of pure, righteous fury. There is the proof. You stood there and looked me in the eye and swore you were faithful. You made me wait a week in this house, smelling your lies, while you pretended to be the victim. He turned to Jeff, his arms swinging out to point at the door. Get out. Get out of my house. You were here, weren't you? Supporting the victim. Well, look at the paper, Jeff. Look at what your loyal sister-in-law really is. Jeff stood up, his face pale, his hands raised in surrender. Evan, calm down. Let's just think about this. Think about what? Evan screamed. He grabbed a glass from the counter and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, the pieces flying across the room. She's a liar. She's a cheat. She tried to make me raise another man's kid. I'm done. Do you hear me, Marina? I'm done. He stepped toward me, his face inches from mine. I could smell the coffee and the anger on his breath. I want you out. Now. I don't care where you go. Go to your sister's. Go to whatever guy did this to you. But if you're not out of this house in an hour, I'm calling the police and I'm having you removed for trespassing. You're nothing to me. You're a stranger. He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, the sound of his footsteps echoing like gunshots as he went to the bedroom to start throwing my things into trash bags. I sat there, frozen, the paper lying on the floor at my feet. I looked at Jeff. He was standing by the door, his eyes wide, his mouth open. Marina, I don't understand, he said. I didn't do it, Jeff, I whispered. I felt a strange, cold numbness spreading through my body. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. There was only a vast, empty void where my life used to be. I swear to you on my soul, I haven't been with anyone else. I don't know how this is possible. I don't know who. I don't know. Jeff took a step toward me, then stopped. He looked at the door where Evan had disappeared, then back at me. I have to go, he said. His voice was different now. The pity was gone. The warmth was gone. I can't be here for this, Marina. This is too much. He walked out the door and I was alone. I listened to his car drive away. I listened to Evan throwing my shoes into the hallway. I looked at the 0% on the floor. I was a woman who hadn't cheated, carrying a baby that didn't belong to her husband, in a world that had already decided I was a monster. I had no house, no husband, and no name. I stood up and walked to the closet. I grabbed a suitcase. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just started packing. Because even though science said I was a liar, I knew the truth was still out there, hidden in the dark, and I was going to find it if it was the last thing I ever did. I moved into Carrie's spare room with 3 trash bags full of clothes and a heart that felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. The drive from the house, the home I had helped decorate, the place where I thought I was building a legacy, was a blur of gray highway and hot, stinging tears. Evan hadn't even looked at me as I walked out. He had stood in the driveway with his arms crossed, watching me leave like I was a piece of unwanted furniture being hauled away by the city. The neighbors had watched from behind their curtains. I could feel their eyes, their silent judgment, the collective whisper of a suburban community that had just found its new villain. By the time I reached Carrie's apartment, my skin felt raw, as if the shame were a physical acid eating away at me. The first 48 hours at Carrie's were a blackout. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just lay on the twin bed in her guest room, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in endless, dizzying circles. I was trapped in a paradox that science said was impossible. I knew I hadn't cheated. I knew that for the 6 years I'd been with Evan, no other man had so much as held my hand. I was a woman who didn't go to bars, who didn't have work friends, who lived for the quiet nights on the couch with my husband. Yet, there it was, printed in cold, clinical ink, 0%. The baby inside me, the baby I could now feel as a constant, heavy presence, was a stranger's child. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Had I had a fugue state? Had I been drugged? Was there a gap in my memory that I couldn't account for? I went through every day of the last 3 months, hour by hour, trying to find a missing piece. But there was nothing. No blackouts, no strange men, no unexplained hours. Just the routine of a woman trying desperately to become a mother. Carrie didn't let me stay in the dark for long. On the 3rd morning, she walked in, threw open the curtains, and sat on the edge of the bed with a notebook and a heavy expression. She didn't bring tea this time. She brought a cold, hard focus. "Marina, look at me," she said. Her voice was steady, the voice she used when she was handling a crisis at work. "We are going to figure this out. If you didn't cheat, and I believe you didn't, then something happened. And we need to find out exactly when. The test says he's not the father, Carrie," I whispered, my voice cracked and dry. "What else is there to find out? The world says I'm a liar." "The world is wrong," she snapped. "Science is science, but people are monsters. Now, sit up. We're going to do the math." For the next 4 hours, we mapped out my life. We looked at my cycle, the ovulation charts I'd kept on my phone, the temperature readings. Based on my first ultrasound, the conception had happened roughly 9 or 10 weeks ago. We looked at the calendar. Late October. I went through the days. I had been working at the library. Evan had been busy with the end-of-the-month reports. We were trying so hard back then. Every other night was a scheduled night. "Think about that week, Marina," Carrie urged, leaning forward. "Was there anything out of the ordinary? Did you go out? Did Evan have people over? Did anything feel off?" I closed my eyes, trying to force my brain back into those weeks. It was a sea of normalcy. Dinner, laundry, Netflix, trying to conceive, sleep. Repeat. But as I sat there, the silence of the room pressing in on me, a memory started to float up from the bottom of my consciousness. It was a Friday night. Evan had gone to his monthly poker game with his college friends. I remember he'd come home late, or at least, I thought he had. I had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a long shift at the library. "There was one night," I said slowly. The memory was grainy, like an old film. It was the night of his poker game. I woke up because I felt him get into bed. It was pitch black. We have those blackout curtains because Evan is such a light sleeper. I remember him shaking me gently, kissing my neck. I paused, a cold shiver running down my spine. I was half asleep, but I remember being so happy because we were in the middle of my window. I asked him if he was in the mood, and he hummed. A low, soft hum. He didn't say a word. He never spoke the whole time. Usually, Evan he's vocal. He tells me he loves me. He asks if I'm okay. But that night, it was just silence. And when it was over, he just rolled away and fell asleep. I was so tired, I passed out again instantly. Carrie's face went pale. She stopped writing. He didn't speak. Not even a word. "No," I whispered. My heart started to beat in a strange, erratic rhythm. He just hummed. And in the morning, when I woke up, he was already in the shower. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought he was tired from the poker game and the late night. "Marina," Carrie said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly low level. "Think very, very carefully. Are you absolutely certain that the man in your bed that night was Evan?" I stared at her, the air leaving my lungs as if I'd been punched. "What? Of course it was Evan. Who else would it have been? It was my house. My bedroom." "It was pitch black," Carrie countered. "He didn't speak. He didn't use his voice. He just hummed. And he was already in the shower when you woke up. Did you actually see him get out of bed?" "No," I said, the word coming out as a strangled gasp. "No, I didn't. I just heard the water running." The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. If the man in my bed hadn't been Evan, then I hadn't been trying for a baby. I had been violated in the most intimate way possible, in the one place I was supposed to be safe. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to doubled over, clutching my stomach. The baby. My baby. If Carrie was right, this child was the product of a nightmare. Who? I choked out. Who has a key to our house, Carrie? Who would know Evan was at poker? Who would know I was home alone? Carrie didn't answer immediately. She just stared at me with an expression of pure horror. The only people who had keys were your parents, and Jeff. Jeff. The kind brother. The one who had stayed when everyone else left. The one who had brought me food. The one who had held my hand while I read the results. The one who told me Evan didn't deserve me. My mind flashed back to the last week. Jeff showing up at my door without being called. Jeff sitting too close on the couch. Jeff telling me he was on my side, always. I remembered the way he looked at me. The pity I'd seen now looked like something much darker. It looked like possession. He was there when I opened the results, I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look shocked. He just looked at me. And when he left, he said he couldn't be here for this, but he didn't sound upset. He sounded satisfied. I grabbed my phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I needed to see Evan. I needed him to know. He was staying with his best friend, Felix, in an apartment across town. I ignored Carrie's pleas for me to stay. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car, my mind a screaming whirlwind of the hum, and the darkness, and the image of Jeff's kind face. I reached Felix's apartment in 10 minutes. I pounded on the door until Felix opened it, looking confused and annoyed. Where is he? I demanded, pushing past him. Evan was sitting on the couch, a beer in his hand, looking like a man who had given up. When he saw me, he stood up, his face hardening instantly. I told you not to come here, Marina. The divorce papers are being drafted. There's nothing left to say. The night of your poker game in October, I said, my voice high and frantic. The Friday you came home late. Were we together that night? Evan frowned, the anger momentarily replaced by confusion. What? No. I stayed at Felix's that night. We all got hammered after the game and I crashed on his sofa. I didn't get home until 8 the next morning. Why are you asking me this? Is this your new move? Trying to gaslight me into thinking I have amnesia? Evan, listen to me, I cried, tears streaming down my face. Someone was in our bed that night. Someone used your key. They got into bed with me in the dark. They didn't speak. They just hummed. I thought it was you. I swear to God, I thought it was you. The room went dead silent. Felix looked at Evan, then at me. Evan's face went through a dozen different emotions in 3 seconds, disbelief, rage, and then, finally, a flickering, terrifying realization. He looked at the floor, his chest heaving. Jeff has the key, Evan whispered. He looked up at me, and for the first time in a week, I didn't see hatred in his eyes. I saw the same horror I was feeling. He was at the poker game. But he left early. He said he had a headache around midnight. He left while the rest of us were still opening the second case of beer. Evan grabbed his jacket. He didn't look at Felix. He didn't look at the beer. He just looked at me. Get in the car, he said. We drove to Jeff's apartment in a silence that was louder than any scream. Evan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, my hand over my mouth, praying that we were wrong. Praying that there was some other explanation. But when we pulled into Jeff's complex, I saw his car. And I remembered the way he'd smiled when he brought me that Chinese food. A slow, knowing smile. Evan didn't knock. He used the shoulder of his suit to ram the door. It wasn't even locked. We burst into the apartment, and there was Jeff. He was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking a glass of milk, looking like he'd been waiting for us. He didn't jump. He didn't look scared. He just set the glass down and looked at his brother. You're early, Jeff said. His voice was calm. Steady. It was the same soft, low tone I'd heard in the dark. Evan lunged across the room, grabbing Jeff by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Tell me the truth. Tell me what you did to my wife. Jeff didn't fight back. He didn't even raise his hands. He just looked past Evan, his eyes finding mine. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, the same smile he'd worn at my kitchen table. I didn't do anything to her, Evan, Jeff said. His voice was a velvet purr. I gave her what she wanted. I gave her the baby you were too selfish to give her. I watched her cry for 2 years because of you. I watched you hide your vasectomy while she thought she was broken. I decided she deserved better. I decided she deserved to be a mother. And I was right, wasn't I, Marina? You were so happy when you thought it was him. I let out a sound that wasn't even human. A high, thin wail of pure agony. Evan's fist connected with Jeff's jaw, a sickening crack echoing through the room. Jeff fell to the floor, but he didn't stop smiling. He wiped the blood from his lip and looked up at his brother. You hit her in front of everyone, Evan, Jeff laughed, a wet, bubbly sound. You called her a whore. You turned the whole family against her. You did exactly what I knew you'd do. You threw her away. And I was right there to pick her up. She's carrying my child. My blood. And there isn't a single thing you can do to change that. Evan was on top of him then, the sound of his fists hitting Jeff's face filling the small apartment. I stood by the door, my world shattering into a million jagged pieces. I was pregnant with the child of a monster. I had been violated by my own brother-in-law. My husband had humiliated me in front of the world for a crime I didn't commit. The silence of the room was gone, replaced by the sounds of a family destroying itself. And in the middle of it all, I felt the baby move again. A tiny, innocent life that was now the center of a nightmare. My husband finally knew the truth, but the truth didn't fix the hole in his heart, or the one he had punched into mine. He looked at his brother, then back at me, realizing that in his rush to be the judge, he had become the executioner of our marriage. He thought he was defending his honor, but he was actually protecting the man who had violated his wife. Before I show you the final courtroom showdown where Jeff's perfect plan turned into a prison cell, and how I finally found the strength to walk away from both of them, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe, because the ending of this nightmare is a lesson every woman needs to hear. The sirens were the only thing that stopped the blood. The blue and red lights strobed against the walls of Jeff's apartment, turning the scene into a flickering nightmare. The police burst through the door, pulling Evan off his brother. Evan's hands were a mess of split skin and bone, but Jeff just lay there. He was unrecognizable, his face a swollen map of purple and red, but through the blood, he was still looking at me. He was still trying to find my eyes. He didn't look like a man who had just been beaten, he looked like a man who had won. As the paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, he whispered my name one last time, a wet, rattling sound that made me want to scrub my skin off with steel wool. The hours that followed were a blur of cold rooms and hard questions. I sat in a police station, wrapped in a thin, scratchy blanket that smelled like industrial detergent. I had to tell the story over and over. I had to describe the darkness, the silence, and the hum to a detective who looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. They called it sexual assault by deception. It was a phrase that sounded too clean for the filth I felt in my gut. While they were taking my statement, Evan was in another room, being questioned about the assault on his brother. When they finally let us leave, the sun was coming up. We stood in the parking lot of the police station, the air crisp and indifferent to the fact that our world had ended. Evan took a step toward me, his hands wrapped in white gauze. His eyes were red, filled with a desperate, crushing guilt that made him look a decade older. Marina, he whispered. I didn't know. I was so angry, I was so blind. I thought the science was the only truth. I should have trusted you. I should have known you would never. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I had loved for 6 years. I didn't see the man who had worked 2 jobs for us or the man who had promised to grow old with me. I saw the man who had slapped me in front of 40 people. I saw the man who had let his family call me a whore for 7 days while I begged him to listen. I saw the man who had sat in the house with me, treating me like a leper, while he was the one who had kept a secret about his own body for 4 years. You hit me, Evan, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was the strongest thing about me in that moment. You called me names that I can never unhear. You turned the entire world against me because your first instinct wasn't to believe your wife, it was to protect your ego. You thought the only way I could be pregnant was if I was a cheater, because you were too cowardly to tell me the truth about your vasectomy 2 years ago. I was scared, he cried, tears streaming down his face. I thought you'd leave me if you knew I couldn't have kids. I wanted to be enough for you. I thought if I kept trying, maybe a miracle would happen anyway. You don't get to talk about miracles, I said. You watched me cry, Evan. You watched me spend thousands of dollars on tests. You let me believe my body was broken. You let me live in a state of constant failure for 2 years. That's not love. That's cruelty. And then, when a real nightmare happened, you didn't stand by me. You were the first one to throw a stone. I'll make it up to you, he begged, reaching for my hand. I flinched away, and the look of pain on his face was almost enough to make me feel sorry for him. Almost. We'll get through this. We'll find a way. We can move. We can start over. There is no us anymore, Evan, I said. You broke that the second your hand hit my face. I'm going back to Carrie's. Don't call me. Don't come by. If you want to talk, you can talk to my lawyer. The next few months were a slow-motion car crash. The legal battle against Jeff was a nightmare of its own. Because there was no forced entry, and because I had technically consented to the man I thought was my husband, the prosecution was a climb up a glass mountain. Jeff's lawyer was a shark. He tried to argue that Jeff was just a lonely, obsessed man who had made a mistake out of love. He tried to make it sound like I was confused and that I had invited him in. But then, the DNA didn't lie. And more importantly, Evan's testimony, the testimony of a man who was losing everything, carried weight. The most satisfying and horrifying moment was the day Jeff was sentenced. He didn't get life. He didn't even get 10 years. He got a few years for a lesser charge, but the real sentence was the public shaming. When the truth came out, when the whole family realized that the good brother was actually a predator who had violated his own brother's wife, the fallout was nuclear. Evan's mother, the woman who had called me trash, tried to call me. She left voicemails sobbing, begging for forgiveness, telling me she was sick with grief over what her son had done. I deleted them without listening. I didn't need their apologies. I needed them to disappear. Evan and I were officially divorced 4 months later. He gave me the house, the savings, and everything we had built. He said it was his way of making it right, but I knew it was just his way of trying to ease the weight of the guilt that was drowning him. He moved to Arizona to be with his parents, a broken man who would have to live the rest of his life knowing that his lack of trust had opened the door for his brother's obsession. The pregnancy was the hardest part. Every time I felt a flutter, I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, sharp reminder of that night. I looked in the mirror and saw a body that had been used as a weapon against itself. I spent nights talking to Carrie, wondering if I could ever love a child that carried Jeff's blood. I felt like a monster for even thinking it, but the trauma was a living thing inside me. In the end, the choice was taken from me. The stress, the legal battles, and the sheer weight of the grief became too much for my body to handle. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I woke up in the middle of the night with a pain that felt like I was being torn apart. Carrie drove me to the emergency room, her hand white-knuckled on the steering wheel, but by the time we got there, it was over. The doctor told me I had suffered a miscarriage. He used words like high-stress complications and trauma response. I sat in that hospital bed, the same hospital where I had once dreamed of bringing a baby home, and I felt a profound, hollow silence. I cried, not because I had lost the child of a monster, but because I had lost the last bit of the woman I used to be. I had lost the girl who believed in miracles. I had lost the wife who thought her husband was her shield. But as I walked out of that hospital, leaning on Carrie's arm, I felt something else. I felt a strange, quiet freedom. The nightmare was over. Jeff was behind bars. Evan was gone. The family that had turned on me was buried in their own shame. I was 30 years old, and for the first time in my life, I didn't belong to anyone. I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a victim, and I wasn't a prop in someone else's drama. I moved to a different city. I got a job at a small bookstore, a quiet place where no one knew my name or the story of the party slap. I changed my phone number and blocked every person from my old life, except for Carrie and my parents. I started seeing a therapist who helped me realize that the slap didn't define me, and that night in the dark wasn't my fault. A year later, I was sitting in a park, watching the sunset. I saw a young couple walking by, holding hands, looking at each other with that bright, naive hope that I used to have. For a second, I felt a twinge of sadness. But then I looked down at my own hands. They were steady. They were strong. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of a life that was never really mine. I realized that the miracle I had been praying for wasn't a baby. The miracle was the truth. It was the truth that cleared my name, the truth that exposed the monsters, and the truth that allowed me to finally, truly be free. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air and smiled. I was Clara. I was a survivor. And for the first time, the lines on my story were exactly where I wanted them to be. I've finished this journey for you. It's a story of how the hardest truths can also be the ones that set us free. What do you think about Clara's decision to walk away from everyone who didn't believe her? Would you have done the same?